Pick that up, he said coldly. That's all you're worth now. The words struck harder than the polished shoe he'd just used to kick her box across the boardroom floor. Papers scattered, sliding beneath leather chairs. A framed photo spun until it landed face down, glass catching the fluorescent light. Victoria Hale didn't bend, didn't flinch. She stood still in her white dress, her hair pulled back, eyes steady as the storm built around her. The man who'd spoken, Arthur Crane, 70, longest-serving member of the board, smirked, as if humiliation were policy. Around the table, no one protested. One director chuckled under his breath. Another whispered, "Finally." The message was clear. The experiment was over. The black CEO had been erased. The security officer at the door shifted uncomfortably, but didn't move. The assistant in the corner froze, stylus hovering uselessly above a tablet. Everyone saw it. No one intervened. Victoria lowered the box onto the table. Calm, deliberate. She didn't reach for the papers crawling across the floor. She let them lie there like evidence. Evidence of arrogance, of contempt, of a boardroom certain that silence meant surrender. "Diversity hire," someone muttered. She never looked the part anyway. Laughter rippled, thin and nervous, like glass about to crack. But Victoria's silence was heavier than their noise. She turned her gaze from face to face, and each man felt it a slow, unblinking weight that stripped their power down to theater. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below, and if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories matter. They expose the bias hiding in plain sight. Now, back to Victoria. The chairman cleared his throat, impatient. "Security will escort her out," he declared. His words tried to sound like authority, but landed more like desperation. Two directors tapped their pens against the mahogany table, mocking the sound of a gavel. Victoria didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. One hand rested on the arm of the chair. The other gripped a single black folder that had not spilled onto the floor. Not resignation, not surrender, something else entirely. And while the board thought they had ended her story, the truth was sharper, quieter, and already unfolding. The storm in that room hadn't finished with her exit. It had just begun. The boardroom had always been dressed like a courtroom oak table polished to a mirror, high-backed chairs lined in leather, a chandelier glowing as if justice itself was on trial. Today, justice wasn't even invited. Victoria Hale stood at its center, not in designer armor, not in jewels, but in a plain white dress that cut sharper than any diamond. Her hair was pulled back, precise, uncompromising. She wasn't there to impress them. She was there to witness them reveal who they truly were. 46 years old, daughter of a seamstress and a postal worker, she had walked into rooms like this for 2 decades. Rooms that never expected her, never wanted her, but always needed her. She was the strategist who rescued companies on the edge of collapse, the negotiator who turned failing contracts into billion-dollar acquisitions. But to these men, she was still just an experiment. Arthur Crane leaned back in his chair, satisfied with his cruelty. The others followed, whispering about transition plans, about stability, about restoring the image they believed she had tarnished. They spoke of her like she wasn't in the room, as if her silence was consent. Victoria let them, because silence to her was never weakness. It was surveillance. She remembered her first boardroom at 29, walking into a biotech firm's headquarters to present a deal she had built from nothing. The chairman then had paused mid-sentence, looked her up and down, and asked, "And who are you here assisting?" She'd smiled, sat at the head of the table, and watched his face break when he realized she wasn't an assistant, she was the buyer. This was no different. Sama arrogance, Sama blindness, different decade, different stakes. The security officer at the door shifted again, waiting for the signal. The young secretary kept glancing at her scattered papers, torn between duty and shame. The board murmured louder now, convinced the decision was final. "End of an era," one said. "She was never the right image," another replied. Image. That word again. It had followed her since her first promotion, since the first time she wore plain clothes to a meeting and was mistaken for staff. They didn't see strategy. They saw stereotype. And every time, she'd turned it into fuel. Victoria lifted her eyes, scanning the men who believed they had written her last chapter. Her hands remained still, her posture unbroken. The box of scattered papers didn't matter. The white dress didn't matter. What mattered was the folder she still held, a folder that carried more weight than every vote cast in that room. Arthur Crane's shoe still rested against the table leg, as if he wanted everyone to remember what he'd done. His smirk lingered like a stain on the air. "She won't even pick it up," another director muttered, voice low but sharp enough to cut. "Of course she won't," Crane replied, louder this time so the whole board could hear. "Entitlement doesn't bend down. That's the problem. Always expecting respect without earning it." A ripple of agreement circled the table. Pens tapped. Papers shuffled. A ritual of dismissal. "She was a token hire," one of the younger men added. "Let's stop pretending otherwise." Another leaned back with a dry laugh. "Image matters, and she was never the image." The words landed like stones, cold, rehearsed, almost bored in their cruelty. Victoria remained still, her white dress catching the light as though defying the room's attempt to dim her presence. She didn't defend herself. Not yet. The secretary at the corner shifted in her chair, fingers tightening around her stylus. Her lips parted, as if to speak, but she froze. The unspoken rule hung heavy. Don't interfere. Across the table, a director with a gold tie leaned forward, voice dripping with mock concern. "We tried," he said. 2 years of patience. And what did we get? Chaos. Headlines. Shareholders questioning our credibility. Look at us restoring order is the only path left. Another chuckled under his breath. "She never looked like a CEO. Not in that dress. Not in that skin." The cruelty wasn't just personal. It was systemic, delivered like a verdict, rather than an insult. Victoria exhaled slowly, her eyes narrowing not in anger, but in focus. Every insult was a line in their confession, and she was letting them write it, word by word. The air thickened with arrogance. Some directors began packing their folders as if the meeting was done, as if her fate had already been signed and sealed. Crane cleared his throat, savoring the moment. "Let's make it official," he said. "We'll circulate the press release by evening. Leadership change effective immediately. Investors will breathe again." The men nodded, relieved, almost celebratory. It was theater, and they believed the act was over. But Victoria Hale hadn't even stepped onto her stage yet. The room was heavy with voices, but Victoria gave it nothing back. She sat down, carefully, the way one might lower a crown onto a throne. Her white dress settled against the leather chair, untouched by the venom spilling across the table. Not a word, not a plea, only stillness. She placed the black folder on the polished oak, her hand resting lightly on top of it. Papers lay scattered across the floor, but she left them there, each sheet, a silent witness to what had just been done. Arthur Crane leaned forward, confused by her restraint. "You've got nothing left," he snapped. "Not a title, not authority, just scraps." He expected a retort. None came. The youngest director laughed nervously, tapping his pen. "See? Even she knows it's true. Otherwise, she'd be defending herself." But Victoria's silence wasn't surrender. It was weight. It forced the others to fill the void with their own noise, their own justifications. Every word they spoke buried them deeper. She folded her hands, calm, composed. Her gaze moved across the table, slow, steady. When her eyes met each man's, he looked away first. The secretary in the corner stared, breath caught. She could feel it. This wasn't resignation. This was something else, something gathering. The chairman tried to break the tension. "Escort her out." He barked toward the door. The security officer stepped forward, hesitated, then froze as Victoria lifted a single finger just enough to pause the room. No anger in her face, no fear either, only a control so sharp it unsettled even those who believed they had won. In that silence, time stretched. The chandelier hummed, the leather chairs creaked. Every man in the room realized, if only for a fleeting second, that perhaps she wasn't broken at all, perhaps she was waiting. But waiting for what? They didn't know. And that uncertainty was more terrifying than any outburst could have been. In the far corner, almost forgotten, sat Mia Torres, the board secretary. 28 years old, first year in this role, her stylus hovered above the tablet she was supposed to be using to log the minutes, but her screen was blank. Her eyes had been locked on Victoria since the papers scattered across the floor. She'd watched Arthur Crane's shoe knock dignity into the dust. She'd heard the words, "That's all you're worth now," and her fingers hadn't moved since. No one looked at her. She wasn't important. She was the note-taker, the quiet witness. But silence pressed against her ribs until she could barely breathe. She glanced at the security officer by the door. He shifted uneasily, eyes flicking between the chairman and Victoria. But he didn't step closer. He didn't want to be part of this. Mia's hand twitched over her tablet. For a moment, she considered pressing the record button, letting the microphone capture every insult, every laugh. She even slid her thumb across the screen, ready to activate it. Then Victoria's eyes turned, calm, steady. They found Mia in the corner, and with the smallest shake of her head, Victoria spoke without words. Not yet. Let them show themselves. Mia froze. The message was clear. This wasn't a moment for secret recordings. This was a moment for the truth to stand naked in the air, unfiltered. Across the table, the directors continued their ritual of arrogance. She's finished. Aye? She'll be a footnote by morning. Laughter echoed again, but thinner now, like glass cracking under pressure. Mia looked back at the scattered papers. One sheet, half under a chair, bore Victoria's signature at the bottom of a contract that had saved the company billions during the last recession. She remembered filing it herself. She remembered thinking, without her, none of us would be here. And yet here they were, casting her out like she was disposable. Her chest tightened. She wanted to speak, but fear held her tongue. Secretaries didn't challenge directors. Not here, not ever. But still, the silence weighed heavier than the oak table between them. And as she sat frozen, she realized something startling. Victoria's silence wasn't just power, it was permission. Permission for others to find their voices. Mia clenched her stylus. She didn't know when, she didn't know how, but she felt it in her bones at some point. She would have to speak. And when she did, this boardroom would never sound the same again. The chairman rapped his knuckles on the table, a hollow sound meant to reassert control. Enough of this, he declared. We've wasted too much time already. The vote was unanimous. She's out. End of discussion. Arthur Crane leaned forward, the smirk on his face sharpening into something uglier. She never belonged at this table, he said, voice carrying like a verdict. We gave her a seat out of courtesy, out of image. But leadership isn't charity, and frankly, she was just a face we used. The words hit the air like sparks, igniting nods around the table. Another director, younger, eager to impress the old guard, added quickly, Let's stop pretending she built anything. Everything here was set long before she arrived. She simply inherited momentum, nothing more. Exactly, someone else chimed in. We've all had to clean up her missteps. The investors were restless. The press was circling. She was liability stacked on liability. A dry laugh broke out from the man in the gold tie. History won't even remember her. At best, a footnote. At worst, a warning. The security officer took one step forward, waiting for the chairman's signal to remove her. His presence shifted the energy, adding the weight of force to their words. Through it all, Victoria remained motionless, one hand still on the black folder, one gaze still cutting slowly across the table. Her silence provoked them more than anger would have. They mistook composure for defeat. Look at her, Crane scoffed, pointing almost gleefully. She won't even defend herself, because she knows she's finished. The room filled with murmurs, each piling on, each echoing the same contempt. Their voices blended into one message: you don't belong. You never did. At the edge of the table, Mia's hands trembled around her stylus. She wanted to scream that they were wrong, that she'd seen the contracts, the deals, the rescues that bore Victoria's signature. But she stayed still, waiting, eyes flicking back to the woman in white who remained unbroken. The chairman finally stood, pressing his palms flat against the wood. It's over, Miss Hale, he said with icy finality. Security escort her out. The words didn't just close a chapter. They tried to slam the entire book shut. But somewhere beneath the stillness, beneath the scattered papers and the false triumphs of the board, a new chapter was already stirring. One they had no control over. The chairman's voice cracked through the boardroom like a gavel. Security! Remove her! The officer stepped forward at once, hand hovering near Victoria's arm. But before he could reach her, Arthur Crane bent down, scooped up one of the scattered papers, and ripped it clean in half. The sound of tearing paper echoed sharp against the polished walls. He let the halves fall like trash onto the table. That's what her contracts are worth, he sneered. Another director pulled a slim black access card from the pile on the floor, Victoria's company ID. He held it up between two fingers, as if it were contaminated. No more entry, no more authority. Then with a flourish, he snapped it in two. The crack of plastic drew a chorus of low chuckles. The man in the gold tie leaned back and said, She should be grateful we aren't calling the press to expose the mess she's left behind. The chairman raised a brow, pretending restraint. Number, she should be grateful we're letting her walk out quietly. That's more dignity than she deserves. The guard's hand finally brushed Victoria's shoulder. Gasps slipped from the secretary in the corner, too soft for the board to notice. But Victoria didn't move. She remained anchored, hands folded, eyes sharp. Arthur Crane kicked another page across the floor, watching it skid beneath the chandelier's glow. By tonight, he said, your name will be erased from every ledger, every record. It'll be like you were never here. The board erupted in laughter, ugly, triumphant, premature. Victoria lifted her chin slightly, meeting the guard's hesitant eyes. He froze mid-motion, caught in the stillness of her stare. It wasn't defiance. It was command. The room mistook it for helplessness. They saw her stillness and believed she had surrendered. But Mia, sitting in the corner with her stylus clenched white-knuckled, knew better. Something about the silence was too deliberate, too sharp. It wasn't the silence of defeat. It was the silence before a storm. The chairman tapped his watch, irritated. Enough delays. Escort her out. Now. The officer inhaled, ready to obey. The board leaned back, satisfied, convinced they had reduced a CEO to nothing but scattered papers and broken plastic. But Victoria Hale's story wasn't ending on this floor. It was about to begin on a battlefield they didn't even realize they were standing on. The room buzzed with smug certainty, the sound of pens tapping, chairs creaking, laughter echoing like a verdict already signed. The broken badge lay on the table, the torn contract under Arthur Crane's shoe. Victoria inhaled once, deeply, then placed her hand on the black folder still in front of her. She slid it closer, slow enough to draw every pair of eyes. Then, without raising her voice, she spoke for the first time since they tried to erase her. Protocol 7. Activate. The words were measured, quiet, but the effect was seismic. From her phone resting on the oak came a crisp voice. Confirmed. Session is now being logged. Compliance notified. Shareholder alert triggered. The board froze. What did she just say? One director stammered. Another frowned, glancing at the ceiling cameras they'd long ignored. Victoria leaned back in her chair, posture unshaken. Every word you've spoken today, she said softly, is being preserved. Every insult, every vote, every action. Arthur Crane barked a laugh, forced and too loud. Empty bluff. She doesn't control the system. But then the large display screen at the end of the room flickered. The company's seal appeared, followed by a message in red. Protocol 7. Active. Audit in progress. Gasps rippled across the table. The chairman slammed his hand against the wood. Turn that off, he snapped at the secretary. Mia flinched, stylus trembling in her grip. I can't, she whispered. It's locked from executive clearance. The room went silent. Executive clearance. The phrase lingered like smoke. Victoria folded her hands calmly. You wanted me escorted out. Consider this your escort, out of every illusion you had about control. The guard by her side stepped back, uncertainty flashing across his face. He'd been summoned to remove her, but now it looked like the room itself was shifting under her command. Arthur Crane leaned forward, voice cracking for the first time. This doesn't mean anything. She's bluffing. But even as he spoke, notifications began chiming on their tablets, one after another flashing urgent. Compliance review. Immediate. Investor alert. Pending. For the first time, their laughter died before it could leave their throats. Victoria Hale had not raised her voice. She hadn't lifted a hand, but with 3 words, she had turned the entire boardroom into her witness stand. And the trial had only just begun. For a moment, the boardroom was frozen, no laughter, no tapping pens, only the soft hum of the chandelier above. The giant screen glowed with red letters, Audit in Progress. Victoria rose slowly from her chair. Every movement was deliberate, unhurried, as though she was the only one in control of time. Her white dress brushed the side of the oak table, and the room seemed to shrink around her. You keep saying I don't belong here, she began, voice calm, steady, cutting through the tension like a blade. That I was a token, an experiment, a face you could use, then discard. Arthur Crane scoffed, forcing bravado. That's exactly what you were. Victoria tilted her head, her eyes narrowing not with anger, but with precision. She placed one hand on the folder, opened it, and revealed a stack of signed certificates, each marked with her name. "Correction," she said, sliding the first page toward them. "You don't fire me." Another page slid forward. "I own this company." Gasps filled the room. The younger director's mouth fell open. The chairman leaned back, face pale, as if the air itself had been ripped from his lungs. "You're lying," one stammered. But then Mia spoke, her voice small but steady. "Those are equity certificates. I filed them myself. She's the majority shareholder." All eyes snapped toward her. The secretary who had been invisible moments ago had just confirmed the unthinkable. Victoria didn't break her gaze. She pushed another page forward. "Every seat you occupy," she said, "exists because I allowed it. Every decision you claim as yours was signed with my authority. You were never removing me. You were auditioning for me." The silence that followed was suffocating. Arthur Crane's hands trembled as he gripped the edge of the table. "Impossible. The board controls this company." Victoria leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to a razor whisper. "No, Arthur. I control the board." The words landed like a verdict. On the screen behind her, a new notification appeared. "Shareholder session. Authorized by majority owner." The men stared, horror etched across their faces. What they thought was a dismissal had become a confession recorded, archived, undeniable. Victoria closed the folder, standing taller now, every inch the authority they had tried to erase. "You thought you ended my story today," she said, "but you only exposed your own." The boardroom collapsed into chaos. Arthur Crane's smirk was gone, replaced by a twitch in his jaw as he flipped through the certificates Victoria had laid down. His hands trembled, the paper rattling like dry leaves in a storm. This can't be real," he muttered, voice cracking. "These could be forged." The chairman slammed his fist against the table, trying to salvage authority. "Security, seize those documents!" But the guard didn't move. His eyes flicked between the glowing shareholder notice on the screen and the woman in white who commanded the room without raising her voice. One of the younger directors, the same who had mocked her as a token, now leaned back, color draining from his face. "Wait, if she owns controlling interest, what does that mean for us?" "It means," Victoria said evenly, "your positions exist at my discretion." Gasps echoed again. The words hung heavier than any insult they had thrown at her. Mia's tablet buzzed with new alerts. She swallowed hard and read aloud. "System log update. 5 board accounts. Suspended pending review. Effective immediately." Arthur Crane lurched forward. "Suspended? No. You can't just erase decades of service." Victoria's gaze pinned him where he sat. Calm, unshaken. "You erased me first." The room went silent. Even the chandelier's hum seemed to dim. Another director fumbled with his phone, desperate. "This isn't over. Investors will never support—" He stopped mid-sentence, eyes widening at the flood of notifications on his screen. Investor statements, legal acknowledgements, compliance directives, all tied to Victoria's authorization. "They already have," she said, her voice a steady verdict. The man in the gold tie tore at his collar, beads of sweat forming. This is a mistake. We can negotiate." But Victoria didn't answer. She simply let the silence return, heavier this time, pressing down on each man until their confidence fractured into panic. Arthur Crane's voice rose, brittle and desperate. "Do you know what you've done? You'll destroy the stability of this company." "No," Victoria replied softly. "You did that the moment you mistook arrogance for leadership." The guard lowered his eyes, stepped back, and folded his hands behind him, no longer an enforcer, but a witness. And around the table, the so-called leaders of the company shifted in their seats, suddenly small, suddenly powerless, as the woman they had tried to erase revealed she had been holding the pen all along. The red glow of the screen washed over the boardroom, flashing with new updates. Suspension confirmed. Access revoked. Victoria remained standing, her posture calm, her tone measured. "You wanted me escorted out. Instead, I'm escorting you." Mia's voice shook as she read the alerts aloud. "Arthur Crane, account locked. Robert Sloan, access revoked. Thomas Reeves, suspended pending audit." She stopped, eyes wide. It's all of them." The men fumbled with their tablets, each device now displaying the same message. Credentials expired, passwords rejected, logins denied. The very system they believed they controlled had expelled them in real time. Arthur Crane's face flushed red. "This is illegal. You can't strip us like this." Victoria tilted her head, almost pitying. Illegal? You spent this very meeting tearing up contracts, falsifying votes, and mocking compliance. I don't need to strip you. You stripped yourselves. The chairman pushed back from the table, chair legs screeching. I won't accept this. His voice broke, cracking under the weight of fear. Victoria lifted the black folder and tapped its cover once. The sound was soft, but it cut through the panic. Acceptance isn't required. Authority is. On cue, a voice came from her phone, crisp and undeniable. Compliance review initiated. Legal counsel notified. Effective immediately. All named individuals are barred from acting in executive capacity. The room collapsed into chaos. Men stood, shouting over each other, demanding explanations, bargaining, threatening. But the louder they grew, the smaller they seemed. Victoria's silence outmatched their noise. Finally, she spoke again, this time with finality. You thought leadership was about power you could hoard. It was never yours to keep. You borrowed it, and today, the loan expired. Arthur Crane slammed his fist against the table so hard the chandelier rattled. But the sound no longer commanded anything. His voice cracked with desperation. You'll regret this, Hale. Victoria leaned forward, her eyes level, her words sharp enough to still the air. No, Arthur. The only regret in this room belongs to you. The guard by the door opened it wider not to remove Victoria, but to prepare for the exit of the men who no longer held authority. The symbolism was undeniable. One by one, the board members realized they had been reduced to spectators in a company they no longer owned. Their signatures, their votes, their arrogance stripped away in the span of minutes. Victoria had not shouted once. She had not begged. She had simply acted. And now, the empire they believed unshakable had been dismantled in front of their eyes. The silence inside the boardroom was suffocating. The same men who had filled it with arrogance only minutes ago now sat hollow, their authority stripped from them in real time. Their tablets flashed, access denied, their badges buzzed red, their seats suddenly felt less like thrones and more like witness stands. Arthur Crane's hands clutched the table edge, veins straining, jaw trembling. For the first time in decades, his voice failed him. No sneer, no command, only silence. The chairman leaned back, shoulders sagging, eyes darting to the screen that glowed with damning red letters. Shareholder override complete. Compliance review active. His lips parted, but no sound escaped. He looked like a man drowning in a sea that only moments ago he believed he owned. The younger director, who had mocked Victoria as a token hire, stared down at his useless tablet. The device blinked with each rejection of his credentials, each reminder that the power he thought was permanent had been borrowed and just revoked. His breathing grew shallow, panicked. The gold tie around his neck seemed suddenly too tight. Mia sat frozen in her chair, stylus trembling in her hand. But unlike the men unraveling around her, her silence wasn't fear, it was awe. She had witnessed the entire performance, step by step, and now realized it hadn't been chance. Victoria Hale had orchestrated everything with patience and precision. Where the board saw weakness, she had been laying the foundation for judgment. The security officer, once ready to escort her out, now stood with his arms folded behind his back. His posture changed. No longer an enforcer of their will, he had become a witness to hers. His gaze met hers briefly, and he gave the faintest nod, a silent acknowledgement of where the true authority rested. Victoria moved slowly, deliberately. She gathered the black folder, tucked it under her arm, and placed her other hand lightly on the back of her chair as if to say, I decide when I leave, not you. Then she stepped away, her white dress trailing against the polished oak floor. Each step echoed. Each sound reminded the men of what they had lost. At the door, she paused. She didn't rush. She didn't need to. Time itself seemed to wait for her. The guard opened the door wide, not as a removal but as a passage of honor. Staff outside craned their necks, sensing something had shifted inside that room, though they didn't yet know the details. Victoria turned her head, her gaze sweeping once more across the board she had dismantled. Her voice carried, low but unshakable, like steel hidden under silk. You thought you ended my story today. In truth, I just ended yours. The words landed harder than any gavel. Arthur Crane pressed forward, desperate to salvage something. You'll regret this, he rasped, but his voice cracked. No one echoed him. Even his allies sat in stunned silence. Their loyalty evaporated in the face of her revelation. The chairman tried again, weakly. We We can fix this. Negotiate. Victoria raised her hand once, and the words died on his lips. She didn't need to shout. Authority radiated from her presence, undeniable, immovable. You mistook silence for weakness, she said. That was your final mistake. Ugh. Mia's heart pounded in her chest. She had never heard words land so heavy, so exact. She realized she wasn't just recording minutes anymore, she was witnessing history, and she would carry this story for the rest of her life. Victoria stepped into the hallway. The marble floor reflected her figure as she walked, each stride steady, elegant, controlled. Employees waiting outside looked up, eyes wide. Some whispered her name. Others lifted their phones, uncertain but compelled. They could feel it, something irreversible had happened behind those doors. Inside, the men remained stranded in their humiliation. Their power had dissolved in under an hour, undone not by shouting, not by chaos, but by strategy and patience. Victoria didn't need applause. She didn't need headlines. She had something more enduring. Proof. Proof that arrogance built on prejudice will always crumble when confronted with truth. As the heavy doors closed behind her, the sound was final, like a verdict sealed. She kept walking. Past the portraits of former chairmen hung on the corridor walls, their eyes painted to watch over the company. For years, those portraits had been reminders of who belonged. Today, her presence turned them into relics of an era already gone. At the end of the hall, sunlight poured through tall glass windows. Victoria stepped into it, the white of her dress glowing brighter, as though the world itself acknowledged her victory. She stopped only once more, turning slightly as if speaking not just to the men behind her, but to everyone who would ever hear the story. Justice doesn't shout, she said. It doesn't beg. It doesn't wait for permission. Justice stands. And when it does, the room changes. Then she walked on. Mia sat alone in the boardroom, the only sound the faint tap of her stylus finally striking the tablet. She wasn't recording minutes anymore. She was writing a record, one the company could never erase. And for every employee who had ever felt invisible, for every voice dismissed as less, the story of Victoria Hale would echo like a bell. Silence is not surrender. Silence is strategy, and strategy wins.